So for today's panel, we have Tejas Mehta. So he's a product lead at a delivery platform team at Shopify. Please wait. Let me make sure I have you here. Awesome. The next panelist, Faye Pan, is a general manager at Uber Freight Canada. And prior to this newest launch in Canada, Faye was also part of the founding member of the team, which led a global launch of an Uber Eats application in Toronto. How awesome was that? Jeff is our third panelist. Hi, Jeff. Just make sure we all see you. Jeff currently serves as a senior partner technology strategist at Microsoft with over 15 years of experience in technology and business consulting. So welcome you all. Make sure I can hear you. If you don't mind, unmute yourself. Just wanna.
Hello.
Okay, awesome. Perfect. So, Sarah, do you mind show the result of the poll? I just wanna know what do people think about this?
Yeah, it's all yours.
Okay, awesome. So we have 29% believe we lost between 40K to 60K, okay? And I think the next guess was a 60 to 80K. Okay, I'm gonna reveal the result. So in fact, based on the statistic we have, that was by Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses. There was a report launched 2 weeks ago. So we estimate there was 158,000 smaller businesses and have to shut down during this pandemic. How sad was it? It was 14% of the entire small businesses in Canada. And you guys probably wondering like why we want particularly having this panel, just to share some statistics with you. In Canada, small businesses contribute 42% of Canadian GDP, employ over 1.2 million workers in Canada, which equivalent to 98% of Canadian workers. So we can confidently say we are a nation of small businesses. And then that's why we really want to make sure those smaller players are being taken care of. So, okay, to kick it off, I just want to ask all panelists the same question. Based on the information you gathered so far, and I know all of you has been working in the space for a while, what do you think are the biggest challenge faced by small business today? Faye, maybe you can kick it off.
Yeah, why don't I go first? So thanks for the introduction. Really excited to be joining everyone tonight to talk about a topic that I'm really passionate about. So as mentioned, I was one of the founding members of the Uber Eats team, and I've now recently moved over to launch our business on Uber Freight. But I also come from an SMB background. My parents ran their own small business for 23 years out in Mississauga. So this is absolutely, those stats are heartbreaking and something that's near and dear to my heart. To answer your question, on the Uber side of things, we actually think about our business in a bunch of different ways. And on the Uber Eats side, in Canada alone, we support over 20,000 restaurant partners. With ride sharing, we have tens of thousands of entrepreneurial drivers and delivery people. And then Freight, the business that I manage, we've got hundreds of carrier partners, many of those individual owner operators and small businesses themselves. And so, what we've seen during this pandemic is unprecedented impact on all of those, right? With Uber Eats, restaurants had to adapt and quickly. They faced quick lockdown measures, sometimes with a day or 2 days notice from local authorities, having to balance their team and customer safety while still bringing in enough income to keep their business alive and pay the rent. On the ride sharing side, obviously with lockdowns, we saw a marked decrease in the number of rides that were being taken around the cities we serve. And so, seeing a real impact on folks that rely on that for, primary and supplementary income. And then lastly, on the freight side of things, small players, on the shipper and the carrier side were affected by manufacturing slowdowns, lockdowns, and then this broader theme around the shift from brick and mortar to e-commerce. We saw many of our partners have to rapidly digitize their operations just to keep the lights on. And across North America, they turned to products like ours, like Uber Freight, like Shopify and Microsoft to help bridge that gap. So those are just some of the things that we saw with the partners that we work with.
Absolutely. I saw Jeff just like not. So do you want to go next?
Sure. So yeah, echo what Faye said. Definitely a rapid movement to digitization and becoming an e-commerce company versus a bricks and mortar company. So a lot of companies quickly having to adapt and adopt that type of business model. I'd say a couple other big sort of trends we've seen is a definite need to manage costs. So a lot of companies have had severely reduced revenue streams. And so, to balance the equation, they've had to reduce costs, and that's definitely true on the IT side, and as well as the operations side. And so they're being kind of squeezed at both ends, and so they're having to do more with less. So really trying to figure out a way to manage their infrastructure in a more cost-effective way, which has accelerated this move to the cloud that we've seen over the past 5 years. A lot of companies have quickly accelerated that motion, as well as a quick acceleration towards virtual desktops and collaboration, as everybody knows, with Zoom and Teams and whatnot, a very quick motion to that kind of remote sort of method of working. So those are some of the major themes that we've seen. And I think another one to touch on would be not just e-commerce. I think there's a need to really meet your customers where they are. So e-commerce being one, Uber Eats, it's digital, but it's getting to the customers their home. And a lot of companies are going to have to adjust and figure out a way to figure out where their customers are at and be able to adjust to that model.
Absolutely. So digitization, cost reduction, meeting customer needs. Okay, so I'm off to Tejas. Do you have anything to add on the top of those?
Yeah, sure. So, I would really echo Jeff's last point, which is the need to meet customers where they are. Omni-channel is something that Shopify has been pushing for quite a few years, and trying to figure out diversifying all the different channels through which you can meet your customers, ensure that you're meeting them in the right context, right time. We saw that has become even more important. Initially, when sort of COVID had everyone go into lockdown, we had a lot of SMBs struggling for cash flow, and meeting your customers through new channels like gift cards and things like that actually became really critical. And those are some of the sort of, and the challenges come with their own opportunities. And so I'm sure we'll get into more of that conversation in a bit. So look forward to that.
Absolutely. There was a stat, small business has recorded almost double the rate of job losses as mid-size or large companies. So maybe just digging in a question. I know everybody facing similar issue, digitalization, cost reduction. No one's having a great time right now. Why do you think it's so difficult for smaller players right now? If you don't mind just going deep a little bit. Who want to take it? Jeff?
I think one example is if you look at the earnings report that Amazon just had, right? Mm-hmm. They had record earnings. And so it's and I'm sure Tejas can to add on to this, it's a question of, omni-channel and being able to, your customers to be aware that you're out there. And so, and Amazon doesn't have to advertise. Everyone knows where they are and uses them. And it's just a question of easily, you can go there really quickly. Small businesses have to fight for eyeballs. They need to fight to get people in the stores. And so it's kind of an unfair battle right now, frankly. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the biggest challenges is creating a safe environment for your customers, making them aware that you're open, making them aware that you can safely deliver your services or goods. Those are all challenges that small companies have that large companies can mitigate largely.
Right.
One thing to add on there is cash flow, right? So I think if you think about the amount of cash that the larger businesses have on hand, it's a lot larger. We recently came across a stat, which was most small businesses have about 27 days worth of cash flow in the bank, so that they could, if they got no additional revenue, that's how long they could survive. So if you kind of put that in context of the pandemic and the length of the lockdown, to extend that cash flow, especially if you're not reaching customers and you've never had a digital strategy before, you're going to have to lay off employees in order to make that cash flow work. So that's been a trend that we see, and there's things that a lot of companies are doing, like small business loans, to support these businesses. But that's ultimately, these businesses have to find new channels to reach their customers.
Absolutely. Faye, do you have anything to add? Or?
Yeah. Huge agreement with what's already been said. I think the cash piece, and even to build on that, is sort of, when you look at government programs and stimulus programs across North America, those are largely focused for the most part on large businesses, which employ a lot of people just from a pure sort of scale perspective. And so, small businesses are finding that they have less access to that. And so I think that, compounds the cash flow issue. And then the last thing I'll say is, most SMBs have less diversification by nature within their business. And so a big business can insulate, using Uber as an example, like we saw a huge dip in the ride sharing side, but Uber Eats actually has been able to keep us afloat to some extent. I mean, we've still had to take austerity measures ourselves, but that's one example of a bigger organization having the privilege of being able to diversify where a smaller organization might not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now let's talk about some success stories. And I know during this time, as Tejas initially mentioned, it might open up different opportunities for smaller players. Have you witnessed some smaller player who successfully completed a smart pivot during this pandemic? Maybe start with you, Faye.
Yeah, has been the silver lining, I think. Just seeing the creativity that entrepreneurs and small business owners are bringing to this space. I think it's obviously been a challenging 6 months, but a lot of creativity. And so a few examples maybe I'll call out. I think on the restaurant side, obviously with dine-in being such a big chunk of business for most restaurants, right? 80% to 90% of their business, having dining rooms shut down was a real challenge. But we saw some great examples in Toronto here, for instance. General Assembly, quickly shifted to like make your own pizza kits that you could order to your house, and service folks that were having a hard time getting to the grocery store, et cetera. We saw, a restaurant like Carbon Bar actually create a totally new menu item in poutine, because I don't know if you've heard, but there was, a huge spike and oversupply in potatoes with the shutdown of a lot of restaurants. And so they wanted to help out farmers that were struggling. And so this was an example of small businesses helping other small businesses by creating an item and doing what they could to amplify that. We've also seen the rise of ghost kitchens and virtual restaurants to meet that demand for home delivery. So those have just been some examples of, in my mind, really smart pivots to take advantage of, how consumer patterns have changed.
For sure. Tejas, I'm pretty sure Shopify has a lot of story to tell. Would you mind share some?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely some similar ones to the ones, Faye, you mentioned with restaurants. And one that really stuck out to me was when we were building a local delivery solution, what we came across is this restaurant that, their dine-in business was shut down, but they had a sort of a secondary side business where they were doing ice creams. And, they thought, okay, instead of like trying to migrate their entire store to online, restaurant to online, they would sort of take the side business and put it online and see what happens. And, they first said, okay, we'll do deliveries only Monday. And then suddenly they got so many orders. They were like, okay, well, we'll do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then, all of a sudden they're now delivering every single day of the week. And so it was really impressive to see kind of them go, try and experiment, see what works. They tried a few different things, and this was the one that kind of worked. And so I think the inspiration that a lot of businesses take out of this sort of thing is like, there isn't going to be one solution. One solution that kind of fits them all. And ultimately, they're going to have to sort of experiment a bit and see what fits their particular business model and how it needs to evolve.
Absolutely. Jeff, do you have anything to add on the top of those?
Yeah, so there's, almost an accountable number of stories through Microsoft. I'll highlight a couple that, I had a hand in just because I kind of know them a bit closer. So one is, it's a small group, it's applicable though to any kind of small business, is the AI research group at Queen's University. So their challenge was, they've got these very expensive, desktop computers that do AI modeling, and they're looking to do a refresh, but the computers are in the labs. No one can get to the labs, and it's expensive outlay. So how can they do that in a way that's much more efficient and effective? And so we've seen this type of solution been applied to countless businesses in Canada and across the world, which is virtualizing your desktop. So putting your desktop in the cloud and then accessing that and then scaling your desktop as you need it. So you can add GPUs, you can add whatever. And so it makes it much more efficient, both in terms of management, but also and security, but also cost efficient. So it's much, much less expensive to run those very expensive workstations. So I did that for Queen's University. I also did it for a small engineering company where they had the same kind of idea where they had to do modeling. It's a transportation company actually. So they had to model like earthquakes and shifts and erosion and whatnot. And again, very expensive hardware, but how to access that in a secure and safe remote way. And then again, virtualizing their desktops and putting them in the cloud was a very efficient way to do that. So I think those are examples of companies that pivoted in kind of an existential way. So we saw a major motion. Essentially, we saw Windows Virtual Desktop on Microsoft side go from a new service to one of our biggest services within 2 months. It just absolutely just exploded COVID. And there's a couple other ones I can talk about.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And I also heard there was an ice cream shop was near the Banqua, and because they find a way of an online subscription model and deliver to thousands of customers now. So we can see a lot of business operational shift, and as well as some business model. I do have a questions in terms of in order to successfully complete a smart pivot, normally require digital capability, right? Either people had to go online and doing this advertisements, but based on the stats we have, there's only like 42% small business owner are baby boomers. There's 23% millennials, and I think there's demographic shift there in the recent years, but we could not deny the majority of that are still baby boomers who might not have the digital capability. So what do you think, how can we help?
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure, Jeff, please.
So I'll say two things. One is I think the digital divide can be thought of, it can be overstated to a certain degree, in that there's different cohorts within the cohorts. So just because you're a millennial doesn't mean you're a coder, right? So, and just because you're a Gen X or a boomer doesn't mean you can't code. So, but there's definitely obviously trends stronger in that direction. The younger you are, the more comfortable you are with digital and mobile, et cetera. But I think also, and Tejas can definitely add on to this, there are a number of vendors, Microsoft, our partners, our competitors, and other vendors out there who can offer services that can accelerate the move to e-commerce solutions, mobile solutions. There's low code, no code solutions that we offer that other vendors offer that allow people that don't know how to develop to build solutions. You don't need to be a coder to build an app, using Power Apps, for instance, on our platform. And Shopify, Squarespace, there's various vendors that provide an e-commerce platform that you can quickly get up and running without having to be a developer. So that's one of the things that we should definitely stress, is that you don't need to be, a citizen, you don't need to be a coder to be, an e-commerce provider. There are vendors that can essentially do that for you, and partners that can help you get there. And again, there's a thing we call citizen developers. So there are these platforms that can accelerate the development. So if you do want to, kind of code it, you can do it with kind of a low code, no code solution that's fairly easy to learn. So if you can build like an Excel formula, you can build an app essentially, is the analogy I kind of use. So there's lots of tools out there. So I just want to kind of stress those 2 points.
For sure. Faye, do you have anything to add in terms of helping them building digital capabilities?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, the platforms that we build on the partner-facing side are meant to be really simplistic. So generally, there's no code involved. And certainly from a product design perspective, we think a lot about how can we bring that magic of like, you remember when you first downloaded the Uber app and you could just sign up and push a button, get a ride. How do we bring that same magic to signing up as an Uber Eats partner, to signing up as an Uber Freight partner, and making it as seamless as possible? So, I think COVID's accelerated that. We spent a lot of time thinking about getting the funnel into a good spot, and certainly putting in features that make it even easier for folks to sign up. But it's definitely something that we've seen restaurants that, before were reticent to adopt the technology. Like I said, I mean, we've leapfrogged decades in terms of adoption, and out of necessity, they've been forced to explore. And I think they've been pleasantly surprised by how easy it actually was to get up and running.
For sure. Tejas, I know you are a practitioner who built solutions. So what's your thought on this?
Yeah, for sure. I think two perspectives on it. One is sort of the perspective around there are people to help. There are partners. There are entire ecosystems around these tools and products. Like nowadays, software companies are not just the software itself, but it's also the community. There are lots of support groups that are directly supported by Shopify, for example. We have a partner community, which is 10,000 plus strong. We have a marketplace that allows you to connect to certified sort of best partners that we have. I know Microsoft has programs like that. Google has been doing a lot of things around this area as well. So there's no sort of, I think the tools and the community and ecosystem is there to support these people and get them to the lens. And so it's just making those two tools available and as easy and accessible as possible. And so that's I think the biggest thing. As a sort of person who's involved in building a lot of these products at Shopify, one of the things that we have sort of struggled with, and I think need to sort of be humbled by as people in tech, is when things come at the intersection of bits and atoms, like the sort of real day-to-day life struggle of these people actually is much more important than you kind of abstract out in software. And like when we talk to small, medium-sized businesses and like just think about the logistics of like how many boxes can you put in a car, right? Like you don't think about that when you're like trying to build a solution at the software level, and you kind of forget those things at times. And so I think it's super important for us to kind of come out of that software lens and sort of really think about what is the customer doing at the end of the day, and like what are their day-to-day struggles.
Sure. I know I pay a lot of attention to speaker right now, but just want to let the rest of attendee knows, please send your question, because we do want to keep this really fast and there's tons of questions we want to answer here. Okay, so I do have a question regarding more like business model. Given current circumstances, do you think the small business owner should consider global opportunity emerge because of digital? What's your take on that? And I know in previous panel, someone mentioned about localization, we're going to shop locally, but then would you advise them to say no to those global opportunities emerge? I don't know who want to take on that.
I'll go first.
Sure.
So I'd say definitely yes, as long as you can service those customers. So it depends on the nature of your business. Obviously, if you're a massage therapist, I wouldn't say go global. But if you're a company that can offer services that can be done remotely, or can be shipped elsewhere, definitely. It just increases the number of customers that you can potentially reach. And again, given this sort of some of the downward pressures we're all talking about, it just, again, can expand that revenue pile that is open to you. And yeah, I think it's definitely something that you should think about. As you're digitizing, that's one of the great advantages of going digital, is that reduces that distance. Doesn't matter anymore, really, unless you're dealing again with atoms versus bits. Distance doesn't matter for services. It can be anywhere. So yeah, definitely if you're a service-based company, is something you want to look at. And even if you're dealing with something physical that can be shipped, it's definitely something to look at.
What about Faye and Tejas?
Yeah, I agreed. I mean, there's never been a better time, right, with the adoption and folks moving online and changing their buying patterns. So to Jeff's point, I think if your business is suited for that, great. But I would caution and make sure that that's not a distraction from core business and, overweighting to the last few months versus the 12 to 18 months ahead and the long-term opportunity. So, there's always trade-offs, but I think if your business is suited and your product is suited to it, the tools are there now, and certainly the consumer appetite to borderless buying is absolutely there.
Tejas, do you want to anything on the?
I think I think the opportunity is just as great on the local side. Is kind of what I would highlight as well. Like there's definitely patterns that are opening up for consumer behavior that trends towards more borderless, 100%, and I think that's going to continue. But there's also a trend that we at least are seeing at Shopify. Example being like local orders increasing like over 100%. In the last since COVID, that indicates some of the buyer behaviors that are probably here to stay based on the patterns, being that supporting local businesses is super important. So, depending on your sort of business model, you really have to put that into perspective. And like, you, as a small, medium-sized business, you're probably struggling with cash at this point. So you probably want to be very strategic in your bet. And so I would say almost you have to be a bit extreme in this decision. It's like, you pick one strategy and you kind of go for it. Probably wouldn't hedge my bets on both sides of the fence.
Sure.
So Michelle, one other thing that I wanted
Yes, please.
Is the other sort of part of the equation that you had, which is our customers going to shop local, right? And I think we've seen that there is an appetite for that. But at the same time, if people are talking with their wallets, they're buying through Amazon, right? They're not servicing mom and pop shops as much as they're servicing large corporations. And so they're although people want to do the right thing, they feel safer right now doing things that are much less like contact. So again, increase your opportunities by looking at a sort of potential multinational approach.
Yeah, maybe just share my personal experience. I always try to maybe, obviously now everything online, but I feel like certain brands don't really recognize the importance of the entire customer experience. Maybe they just try to, do everything digitally like too quickly. And I remember there was a time I was trying to buy something for my friends and just never deliver. So that to, I guess, a customer myself, and I feel like, well, if that happened once, how would I trust a company? Just would never get my shipment complete, right? So I think maybe on the top of those, rather than talking about globalizations or localization, this is a fundamental, like, are you serving the customer basic needs? Okay, so we also have a question regarding to like current state. So now we see reopenings started in different phases. And how do you advise small businesses to balance health safety concerns and economics? Because we all know restaurants operating maybe 50% less capacity than before. And then on the top of those, there's also consumer who want to be served. So I don't know who want to take this one.
I can
Faye?
start. I mean, you mentioned
Sure.
restaurants, so Eats is probably the best example. I mean, I think this is like, a live topic of discussion and evolving, weekly, daily. So everyone's really learning here. What we've seen with our partners is really a wide range of approaches across businesses. So if you look at Uber Eats in the US and restaurants there, we know that they've been a little bit more aggressive about starting online, whereas, here in Canada, obviously public health guidance and requirements are slowing the opening a little bit. On freight, we've seen mandatory mask requirements to cross the border. We know many of our shipper partners are voluntarily implementing PPE requirements at their facilities, whether for the safety of their team or for the safety of carriers that are coming in. And then on our rides business, we've had, dual mask policy for a number of months now for both the drivers and the riders. So, I think everyone is learning and taking cues from peers as they go. And this is, something that's going to continue to evolve. But we see real earnestness from the partners that we're working with and trying to optimize and find that perfect balance point of, protecting their teams, serving their customers, and, helping to stop the spread. So I think it's an evolving one for sure.
I can maybe follow up on that. One thing that we have seen is the businesses that do really well with as things reopen is those who take those considerations into account. So those customer needs, and to your sort of anecdote there, Michelle, it's like if the customer expectation obviously is to get their goods delivered, now there's additional expectations, which is get their goods delivered with no touch, be more accurate about when the things are going to be delivered because you may or may not be home, being able to schedule deliveries in certain fashion. And so it's the businesses that will take these new criterias that buyers have, consumers have, into and enfold them into their business. I think those are the ones that are ultimately going to succeed, and those are necessary to manage the health and safety concerns, right? So it's almost sort of a win-win situation here, where it's like you take those criterias and you turn them into sort of economic opportunities, because that will build trust with your customers and long-term value.
Jeff?
Yeah, just to add on to that, so I totally agree that it's the companies that are going to do this in a way that is customer first and is taking customer safety into account are the customers, or rather the companies that are going to do well and are going to excel and come out of this in the best position. I think to just build off that, I think that comes from a number of things. So there's redesigning your store to make it safe. Following guidelines, obviously, you can use analytics and whatnot. Again, these are tools that are now fairly inexpensive for small companies to leverage in order to figure out high traffic areas in your store, figure out where customers need to go. Like if you go to Canadian Tire, for example, if you look for an item, it'll tell you where that item is in the store, like what aisle, what bin, so you go right there and get it and get out. And so if you can provide that kind of service to your customers to help streamline the process. And then in addition, one of the things in, Uber Eats and companies like this and Shopify have solutions that, and Microsoft as well, that can service customers in this way is contactless payment. So that's becoming almost a necessity now, that customers have an option to pay without cash and to pay without actually physically touching via tap to pay and whatnot. So whether it's Square, whether it's Shopify, or different POS systems like Dynamics POS that offer like a contactless payment system, that's definitely something that you want to look at from a retail perspective, just to make customers at ease.
Faye, do you have anything to add on top of this? And I just maybe have a follow-up questions. How we can, we talk about tests, right? What's an effective way for small businesses to test, especially now number is important. And I know we have a lot of analytical professionals listening to this. So what would be the good thing to test based on your experience?
It's specifically around, how to adapt on the health and safety side.
Yes, health and safety side, and how we also worry about the economics, right? Because now we probably wouldn't be able to do exactly the same thing. And then on the top of all the operation deliveries or digital e-commerce, now we still need to serve physically.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's just a lot of things to handle.
For sure. I mean, I think, listen, what we've seen on the restaurant side is a lot of our partners experimenting with different delivery methods, right? So pickup as a feature has just skyrocketed since we've launched. And you see really Pi here in Toronto is a great example where they had sort of a full tunnel set up. I don't know if anyone has purchased from Pi during COVID, but they had a full tunnel set up, a screen outside. Don't even approach the door until your number comes up. And they built all of this to try and make that customer experience safer and more comfortable. We've seen restaurants experiment with, expanding product lines, right? So an interesting thing to test would be what other adjacent products to your core one could your customers also be looking for? And what we've seen with AGCO regulations relaxing is things like alcohol now getting picked up, grocery items. Restaurants are trying to support their supply chain and produce suppliers by saying, hey, we'll also wholesale, fresh produce or fresh meat, and we'll add that to our menu and advertise it to our customer base. So we're seeing some really interesting experimentation on product diversification, delivery diversification, and oftentimes to really solid results.
Cool. I do want to start asking a bunch of questions coming from the audience because they just flooded in. So what are the biggest and most exciting opportunity for SME in the next 12 and 18 months? I don't know who want to take that.
I can maybe kick things off.
Please.
One thing that's really been, I think, exciting for me to see is some of the experimentations and innovations that Faye, you just mentioned, right? Like it's been really incredible to see a lot of these businesses try out so many different things. And at Shopify, we kind of see this at sort of in aggregate as well as in individual stories. And new delivery methods are being tried all the time. People are experimenting with, competing with Amazon with fast and free delivery and figuring out ways that they can do that. How can they build that into their margin? I think that's like shorter term, really exciting. The other thing, sort of market trend that we see that I think small, medium-sized businesses should take advantage of is if you look at some of the bigger advertising platforms like Google and Facebook, you'll see brand advertising starting to decrease on those platforms, because brand advertising right now with pandemic in place is typically just something that brand advertisers don't feel comfortable in spending that money because they have no idea when they will get their returns. Whereas D2C and sort of e-commerce brands that are trying to create new businesses, I think the cost of advertising is actually going lower. So what these businesses should try and do is figure out what are some, whether if you're an existing business, what are some additional niches that you can capture, what are some adjacent markets that you want to enter, or if you're a brand new business, what you should be testing out new products, because the costs are actually lower to advertise and reach your customers than ever before. So I'm really excited to see kind of new businesses build there.
Anyone else want to add on?
Sure, I can.
Sure.
So there's a number of big opportunities. I think the biggest one is disruption brings both challenges and opportunities, and this is probably the biggest disruption we've seen in our lifetime. And the move to digital and moving to the cloud and creating a digital business creates a whole wealth of opportunities in terms of innovation and things you can add on top of that. So if you create your business, if you take your business and make it digital, it's very easy to add, an AI chatbot on there very cheaply. Like, we have tools that can do that with a couple clicks. You can, reduce costs through robotic process automation. Again, very inexpensive tools that can do that. There are very fairly easy tools that you can leverage AI and ML very inexpensively relative to 5 years ago, where you can look for you can analyze and figure out, what are the trends what product categories, to Faye's point, like which ones are standing out, like do experiments and figure out, okay, based on this, what are the outliers here? Which products are selling crazily and why? And so those tools are now available to kind of anybody. You don't need to be a Fortune 500 company to have like analytics tools at your fingertips or do AI and ML models. So it's fairly easy now for small businesses to take advantage of this. And so that's a great opportunity. And I think the advantage that small businesses and medium businesses have is it's easier to transform your business if you're smaller, right? Obviously it's more difficult. It's going to be more painful because you're a smaller company, but it's easier to change a 5-person company than a 500 or 5,000 person company. It's a total culture shift and lots of, crazy footprint in terms of retail or real estate, versus a small company can quickly change on a dime. So that's an advantage that small companies have over large companies, and they should definitely take advantage of it.
Absolutely. Faye, I don't know if you want to add on this, or we can move on to the next one.
I think really well said. That I'll just underline. I think the the forcing function of adopting tech through COVID for, whatever purpose to power your business is going to be the biggest unlock for small businesses in the next 12 to 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
We saw on the restaurant side, mom and pop restaurants that historically, said, we never do delivery. Like, that's just not our brand. It's not how we make our money. Having to pivot again to keep the lights on, and then realizing actually there's a way that we can do that so that it still feels authentic to us and still meets our customer expectations or exceeds them. And so they're excited to find that new cash opportunity and growth stream. And then on the freight side, just adoption of tech, it's the trucking industry is antiquated. And so, for the shippers and customers that we've seen partner with us, that access to data that Jeff was talking about, this ability to optimize using, a dashboard and analytics that they never saw before is actually helping to power that next step change in efficiency and cost savings down the line. And so I think that's really exciting for a lot of our partners as well.
Absolutely. I think we are ready to move on to the next question. It's about Amazon. So how do you think small players should compete with those big bad boys in control? Do you think those small businesses should develop their own online presence, and what's the best way to compete?
I can start with this because I think Uber Eats, I'm just reading
Sure.
it, is called out, but I think there's Tejas probably has some thoughts about how to compete with Amazon. So I could pass it back to him. Listen, I think there's room for all of it, right? Before COVID, approximately 40% of Canadians didn't consider or hadn't even tried food delivery before. So I think sometimes it's easy to get into, the urban bubble of where we live and say, okay, everyone's doing this, it's so prevalent. We're actually way under indexed and under penetrated relative to markets like China, for instance. And so we have all these different players in the market. And I think it's up to restaurants to decide what's the right mix for them. We have very few partners on the platform today that are just with Uber Eats. In fact, COVID has blown that wide open and said, okay, I'm going to work with as many different platforms as possible. And then I'm also going to experiment and say, hey, is there a radius around my restaurant where I actually feel good delivering on my own? Conceptually, it's really difficult for a small business to think about delivering 50, 100, or 200 orders in a given day, which we have SMBs on the platform that do. And so, again, I think you want to look at different platforms for different reasons, and there's certainly enough to go around. So I think we're far from approaching this Amazon monopoly situation, and for restaurants, it's in their best interest to diversify and experiment with what works best for them.
Tejas?
Building on that, I think there's actually more opportunity than ever before. Yes, Amazon has grown, but I think still has the presence of other sort of channels at the same time, because just recently looking at some data reports published by Google, and before the lockdown in the US, about only 20% of product searches began outside of Google or Amazon. But during the lockdown, that actually increased to over 40% of them starting somewhere else. And so I think you can't highlight the importance of diversifying the channels that you have, and ultimately treating all of these things, even your online store, as a channel, right? It's not the entirety of your business. Your retail shop is not the entirety of your business. It is a way to get your customers to the value that they're looking for, the goods that they're looking for. So thinking of it in that sort of holistic sense, I think is the most important thing. And so definitely build an online presence, but that's not the only strategy in your toolbox. People are selling things on TikTok, they're selling on Instagram. There's a lot of other places that you can be reaching your customers.
Jeff, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I just want to echo what's been said already and double down on it a bit. Definitely an omni-channel approach is what you want to do. I totally agree that digital is not the only channel you want to be doing. You're not going to beat Amazon playing their game. You need to figure out a new game and play different rules, and that's how you're going to succeed, by find your customers, like Faye's point, like creating like new experiences for your customers via tunnel or whatever it might be. Figure out the ways in which you can be creative, and again, meet your customers where they are and make them feel safe. And there's still an advantage to an in-person experience. People don't want to buy clothes online. There's various things that people don't want to do online. So you want to figure out a way to make those experiences easy, remove friction as much as possible between you and your customer, and make them feel as safe as possible.
I have a next question. What other tools and services offered by companies other than the one you work for that you admire and think we should be more used by small businesses?
I can go first. Google, I think in this case, especially during COVID, I've seen a lot of education content come out from them. I've seen a lot of companies are doing this, but I think just the position that Google holds, and a lot of people use their email software. A lot of people use Google every day, and so the position they have in the market and the reach that they have, I think, by bringing that sort of education and market insights and things like that to small, medium-sized businesses, I think they have done a really good job of like almost just helping merchants for free. Ultimately, it brings, it comes back to their bottom line when they sign up for their products. But I think, that's one that I would admire.
Jeff?
I'll address one that we're all kind of using right now, which is Zoom. So I think it's a company that was on our radar in terms of competition, but not expected to explode the way it did. Obviously, it was a black swan event that created it, but definitely figuring out a model that allows companies to inexpensively collaborate. Again, it's like all ships, the rising ocean raises all ships. And so the Teams has done very well as well. But I think Zoom has definitely brought collaboration to the masses, and it definitely pushed us to make our products better. So I think it's definitely a company that I admire for what they've done and how quickly they've adopted it and adapted it to make it more secure based on the issues they had initially. And so I think definitely it's been it's in the zeitgeist and everyone's talking about it. So it's definitely a product that I think has helped a lot of people.
Faye?
I'll give a shout out to Tejas and Shopify. I've been so impressed with how they've stepped up over COVID, and obviously heroing and helping the small business has been at the core of what they've been trying to do, since their inception. But I think things like the financing piece, how quickly they moved on retail and enabling their partners to do curbside, the product developments that have been pushed out. Like, I just think it's very clear how much they value SMBs and how much they value, helping their partners out. And so I've been just blown away by what they've been able to push out in a really short period of time.
I have one more question coming from the audience. Do you think companies should have corporate social responsibility to help the community and other small businesses during COVID-19? Maybe you guys can also touch on any support mechanisms so far and being effective.
Yeah, I can start off here, since it's referencing the poutine thing in the question as well. I mean, absolutely, right? Like the three of us that are on this panel, our companies would not survive without SMBs at the core. And so, we absolutely have a responsibility to make sure that helping them and helping them be successful through something as unprecedented as COVID is top of mind. And so, some of the things that we've done at Uber are we did $0 delivery fees for small businesses, promoted that throughout the early parts of COVID. We have created a restaurant support fund to help restaurants, and allow their workers to actually apply for this in the absence of, a bigger social safety net. We have been working with a number of partners on, how do we create incentives for them to promote themselves, and give them, basically like free marketing and promotional opportunities within the app and within the network. And then on the freight side, just trying to make owner operators' lives a little bit easier with things like Eats credits and health and safety supplies, PPE, things that are, potentially tougher to get, especially in the early days of COVID. So I absolutely think we have a responsibility, because without their success, we don't have any success. And so it's not just the right thing to do, but actually quite existential to the long term.
Who want to go next? Tejas?
Yeah, sure. 100%. Our businesses don't exist without SMBs, and that's the beauty of being a platform like Shopify. It's completely aligned with the incentives for the businesses. So businesses growing, ultimately, it is part of our core mandate. And I think even broader than Shopify, the entire ecosystem has a responsibility to make sure, because ultimately it's when the SMB ecosystem is stronger, ultimately players like Amazon and even the biggest companies can actually flourish, right? Like even if you look at a company like Amazon, and alluding to the earlier question, 50% of its revenue comes from third-party sellers. More than 50% of its revenue comes from third-party sellers. So it thrives on these types of things. So it's absolutely vital for us to keep this ecosystem healthy. And so, Shopify has a COVID-19 specific page. So if you go to shopify.com/COVID-19, you can find all the things that we have kind of been trying to do. And some of the things are similar to what Faye described. We do have a capital product that allows small businesses to get loans at a much more lucrative rate than you would otherwise. We have cash flow management tools. So if you're trying to understand how much cash can you make, how much can your cash take you, how far can it take you, you can do that. You can look at the solutions we have education and all those things. So I think those are some of the things that we're doing, but I suspect there's actually a lot more, and that's one of the things I think we need to do, which is just start listening more. And I think a lot of companies are doing that, but we just need to keep doing more of that and listen to what our customers really need.
Sure. I think there's a question asking, Jeff, please.
Sorry, I was having system issues. So I think, absolutely echo everything that Faye and Tejas just mentioned. Microsoft definitely has a corporate responsibility approach that we have, especially around COVID. We've done a number of things related to both small businesses as well as the community at large to offer free software, discounted software. A lot of our partners are offering free services, discounted services, et cetera, to help small businesses. And there's a number of things we're doing also directly related to the response, whether it's helping research companies that are looking into vaccines. So we're actually directly helping find a solution for this, in addition to helping small businesses. So I think across the board, companies need to be thinking about that.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Do you see a conversion between restaurant and grocery stores?
I can take this one. Absolutely. I mean, I think there's some folks have coined the term grocerants as well. So if anyone's been to, T&T was like the original, but Nations now is really taking over. We're seeing just this huge boom in prepared foods, and actually that being like a huge draw for grocery stores. And then specifically on the Uber Eats side, I mean, we recently announced our purchase of Corner Shop that's live here in Toronto. If you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to do so. And so we now have that as a tile just within the Uber Eats app, right? So again, trying to hit on this, these different use cases, and there being a bit of a blurring of the lines, especially as, it's basically like whatever you want delivered to your door. This idea of going to a restaurant for a distinct group of items, or then going to a grocery store for a distinct group of items, I think is starting to blur. So yeah, absolutely. And accelerated by COVID for sure, as we saw groceries get into food and restaurants get into grocery items, there continues to be a blurring of the line.
Okay, anyone want to add on that? Or
yeah, I just say that the one thing COVID's done, to Faye's point, is trends that are already happening, it accelerated them. So things that are already in the pipe are happening, just happened a lot faster and are happening faster than we expected. Like that.
Sure. There was one more question about delivery. Do you see drone taking off as a cost-effective means of delivery?
Yeah, love the pun. No, I think we're a few years away from this yet. So we actually do have, as part of our advanced technologies group, a group of folks that are working on drone delivery out in California. This is one where regulatory timelines are going to be what dictates things. So I think we're a ways off from this being, you truly getting on a regular basis your food delivered by a drone. As cool as that vision is, I don't think we're going to get there, in the next few years. But we are actively experimenting with it. It's something we're exploring. I wouldn't hold your breath.
There's also
Jeff, please.
There's also both aerial drones and quadrupedal drones. If you've seen
yes, yeah.
So and that's another sort of category which has sort of less regulatory issues with it in terms of door delivery from a truck to a door. So there's different angles too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's actually a Toronto startup that's been working on that. I think there's still some kinks to work out there as well.
Yeah, I suspect mass adoption is quite a while away, but in terms of experimentation, I think we'll probably start to see some of those land-based drones doing very niche local deliveries, like very short distances, and that's something that we've seen sort of some of our partners starting to look into.
Cool. I think we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask the last questions. Could you share some advice with the smaller players in this market in order to survive or thrive after this pandemic? Because we talk a lot like digitizations and cost reduction and everything. So what will be the most important thing they need to take away?
I can go first. I mean, I'm an eternal optimist, so take this with a grain of salt. I think the key message and what we've talked about today is there's been a lot of challenges for SMBs, but for me, I think like a whole new world of opportunities has also opened up for businesses, and particularly small businesses, to grow. So we talked about e-commerce, delivery, pickup. All of these services have leapfrogged, we've accelerated by years in terms of consumer adoption, and it just opens up like a whole new world of consumer touch points for SMBs. From Tejas, and you've heard like, hey, platforms are moving at warp speed to provide SMBs with tools to not just kind of sustain themselves through COVID, but to really build their businesses over the long term. And so, if I had my own SMB today, I'd be really thinking about how do I expand my product offering, my delivery, diversify, what I can bring to consumers, and then use technology to really accelerate that, not just out of necessity, but like, based on possibility as well. So I get pretty excited about the opportunity for SMBs in the years ahead.
Tejas?
Yeah, so I think to build on that sort of opportunity, I think one of the questions that early on people kind of asked was like, are the trends that are going to come, are they going to stay? And I think one thing that was really interesting for me is like survey data indicates that almost 70 to 75% of consumers have tried a new thing like curbside pickup or local delivery or some other pattern of getting the goods that they want that they haven't done before. And of that 75%, almost 80% of them are looking to keep with that pattern because they've actually enjoyed that behavior. And so, the future has been brought forward and in a good way, right? It's like these are actually, some of these experiences are things that eventually were going to happen, and we've just been sort of forced along to adopt them a lot faster. And so I think ultimately businesses do have to look at it as like, hey, the world has changed, and if I don't change my business to meet my sort of new consumer needs, I'm going to be left behind. And so I think definitely businesses need to be optimistic, but they need to be realistic with that set, right? Like they have to adapt, and there's lots of tools as we kind of went through in this panel, and lots of companies trying to help SMBs get there. And so I think it's just they have to change their strategy and can't hope to go back to the way that they did things.
Last but not least, Jeff.
Yeah, I just want to echo what was said. The first thing being that this is going to be protracted. This isn't going to end in the next few months. And to Tejas' point, there are permanent changes occurring. So there's not going to be a return to the previous way of life. It's going to be a new way of life, whatever that might be, right? So there's customer and consumer behavior changes that are going to be permanent, and just ways of doing business that are going to be permanently changed, and we're going to have to adjust to those. Second is, again, there's a lot of tools out there to help small businesses adjust to that new reality that we're both dealing with now and then long term. There's lots of vendors, not just Microsoft, but Google, Amazon, Shopify, et cetera, and companies that help businesses such as Uber. And these tools are either heavily discounted or very inexpensive or free, depending on the scenario that the customer is in, or sorry, the consumer or the business is in. And then third, although this is in time of like incredible difficulty and challenge, it's also a time of incredible opportunity to take advantage, in not a bad way, but in terms of an opportunistic way. And digitize your business, take advantage, and figure out how to take your current offerings and make them more compelling to your customers. And then, and again, to the point earlier, it provides new opportunities for both new business models, new service offerings, as well as potentially going global and reaching new customers. And then lastly, the key thing underpinning all this is, as we said before, reach your customers where they are at. Reduce friction to selling as much as possible, and make your customers feel as comfortable and as safe as possible, being one of your customers. And that's the key to success.
Thank you, everyone. I guess that sums up this panel. Sarah, I guess off to you. Thank you, Faye. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Tejas.